in Moscow and Idaho Falls will be starting in just a minute or
How are you? Hold on. Sure. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Trudy Anderson, the Associate Vice President CEO for the University of Idaho Boise Center. And I also have the great privilege of chairing the search committee for the College of Education Leadership and Counseling Department Chair. And with us today, we have a wonderful candidate, and he will be providing his overview and a response to some of the questions that the college has identified for him. I would like to give you a brief introduction of Dr. Brooks, but let's start with some introductions all the way around. And I would like to start with our colleague in northern Idaho, far north in Coeur d'Alene. And our screen in Boise is a little dark, but it looks like several in the room. And we know there's some conflicting meetings in Coeur d'Alene this morning. And so you've got a part house available. Would you go ahead and introduce yourselves in Coeur d'Alene? I think you're on mute.
I promise I did unmute it. Really. This is Susan Stunzner in Coeur d'Alene, and I'm with Rehab Counseling.
Kathy Canfield-Davis, Educational Leadership.
Hi, back here, Marcy Hartzell. I'm the Executive Assistant for Charles Black here in the Coeur d'Alene Center.
Well, good morning, everyone in Coeur d'Alene. How about in Moscow?
Good morning. This is Jim Gregson, Associate Dean, College of Education.
And this is Tony Pickering, Department Chair, Movement Sciences.
Melinda Hamilton, Director of STEM Education.
Raimi Atterbury, I'm the Education Librarian.
Linda Taylor, Counseling and School Psychology.
Laura Holyoke, Adult Organizational Learning and Leadership.
Well, good morning, Moscow. And in Idaho Falls, would you introduce yourself?
This is Brian Mon, Director of the Professional Practices EDD.
I'm Carol Baldwin, Associate Registrar.
Well, good morning, everyone. Here in Boise, may I ask that we go around the room, and I'm just going to look clear in the back far corner, Dr. Crow.
Michael Croth, Adult Organizational Learning and Leadership.
Stephanie Fox, Boise Center.
I'm John Cannon from Career and Technical Education.
Mike Johnson, Education Leadership.
Beth Cunningham, Rehabilitation Counseling and Human Services.
Mary Gardner, Educational Leadership.
Lori Morgan, AOLL.
Alex Muzaliwa.
Penny Tenuto, Educational Leadership.
Liz Ridgway as Executive Assistant.
Michelle Hopkins, Boise Center.
Denise Engelbrecht, College of Engineering.
Vincent Fortunato, Affiliate Faculty, AOLL.
Brian Austin, Rehabilitation Counseling and Human Services.
Eric Hadley, I'm a Finance Specialist for the department.
Casey Witzenberg, Admin Assistant to Educational Leadership.
Allison Touchstone, Agricultural Education and 4-H Youth Development.
Michelle Weeds, College of Ed.
Miki Kurosawa, Boise Center.
Sandy Schultz, Boise Center.
Carol Marlowe, Boise Center.
Ralph Ludwig, I'm the Director for the College of Engineering here at Boise.
So we'll welcome everyone and thank you so much for taking some time. All of you at the various locations in here also have a little feedback form on your table, and the search committee would appreciate very much any comments that you would leave for us today. So if you would complete those, we'd most appreciate it. Well, now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jeffrey Brooks, who is the Associate Professor of Educational Administration and Associate Director of the School of Education in the College of Human Services at Iowa State University, where he teaches various courses related to educational leadership and serves as coordinator for the Educational Administration program. He is also editor of the Journal of School Leadership, series editor of the Educational Leadership for Social Justice book series, secretary of AERA Division A Administration, Organizations, and Management, and a former chair of the AERA Leadership for Social Justice Special Interest Group. His research focuses on sociocultural and ethical dynamics of educational leadership practice and preparation, and most recently, that has led him to explore how school leadership is influenced by racism and globalization. Most of his research has taken place in the United States, but he has also conducted studies in the Philippines, where he studied leadership for social justice as a Fulbright scholar. He has authored 2 full-length books on his research, Black School, White School, Racism, and Educational Misleadership, and The Dark Side of School Reform, Teaching in the Space Between Reality and Utopia. And I must say he's also co-edited 5 more books, and the titles are so interesting. I have to say one of them is What Every Principal Needs to Know to Create Equitable and Equitable Schools. Another is Juggling Flaming Chainsaws, Academics and Educational Leadership, trying to balance work and family. Before coming to Ames, Iowa in the fall of 2011, Dr. Brooks was a professor at the University of Missouri, Auburn University, Florida State University, and Florida International University. Prior to his time in post-secondary education, he was a middle school language arts teacher at Columbia Independent School. He earned his PhD in educational leadership and policy analysis from the University of Missouri in 2003. Jeff Brooks, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about, I'm going to work my way toward the 3 questions that were posed to me that I was supposed to answer, and so hopefully I'll touch on them all, but I'm not going through it just sort of question by question. What I'd like to do is start off by getting my clicker to work. And then once I master that, I want to tell you a little bit about my background, though you just heard probably more than you even needed to know. I've been a professor for about 10 years, all at research extensive universities. I've been a program coordinator for the last 5 of those years, and more recently I'm the associate director of the School of Education at Iowa State University, a position that's basically like the School of Education is a curriculum and instruction and an educational leadership and higher education department coming together to make one gigantic department called the School of Education. So I've already been engaged in a lot of the sort of normal department chair activities, evaluating faculty, working with budgets, strategic plans, all of those kinds of things. So that's what I'm doing these days. I was a 7th grade language arts teacher, so I'm very familiar with this phenomenon of everybody sitting in the back of the room. As a scholar, Trudy talked a lot about some of the things, but just to highlight a couple of things that I think might be relevant. I do have both domestic and international agendas. I look at things like social justice, globalization, racism, school culture, poverty, and mainly try to look at the way that school leaders can influence these dynamics in their schools and the way that those dynamics influence school leaders. So looking at it as a reciprocal thing, not just as something that school leaders do at things, but as something that also influences them. I've written a lot of things, as have many of you, and have also, in addition to my editorial work, have worked on several grants and studied things like charter schools, dropout prevention, turnaround schools, and some other things. More recently, I'm part of a team looking at community schools in the Midwest, which is a growing model for combining community engagement efforts with leadership. As a teacher, which I think is relevant to this conversation, I've taught over 20 different courses in educational leadership, research methodology, and educational foundations. My orientation as a researcher is that I'm trained as an ethnographer, and to me that means increasingly moving towards mixed method research. I've done lots of work both domestically and abroad in that area and taught many different classes, both qualitative research classes and increasingly working with mixed method studies, looking at different aspects of culture. When thinking about teaching philosophy, I have a orientation that probably many of you share, that adult learners bring a rich set of experiences to the classroom. And the kinds of things we do with adult learners need to be engaging, they need to be relevant. One of the things that I try to do in all of my classes is make it so the assignments that we do have a life outside of the classroom. I do lots of assignments, like we've had students make films that they end up showing in their schools, do policy briefs that they have used both in their schools and with legislators in their communities, and lots of things like that. I really believe that what we're doing in the classroom can and should be translatable into practice immediately. I also, like many of us, believe that as an educator, one of the things that we need to do is that we need to serve our communities both professionally and personally. So just like many of you, I've been very involved at all different levels of the universities that I've worked with. I've also partnered with many school districts, many departments of education, most recently in Alabama and Missouri, where I worked closely with both of the departments of education there to implement different kinds of initiatives. I've also contributed increasingly at the national level through AERA and UCEA, which is the University Council for Education Administration. It's one of the larger research-focused educational administration organizations in the country. But what probably most of you are most interested in is what kind of department chair I would be. And so what I'm going to try to focus on for the rest of this presentation is talking about some of the principles that guide the way that I approach leadership of an academic unit like this, and then also kind of work my way into being a little bit more specific as we go through the presentation. Okay. The first of the 5 principles that guides the way I feel about leadership is that it's got to be democratic, equitable, and transparent in terms of the way decisions are made. One of the things that we find in academic units is that the decisions that are made basically fall into 3 categories. There are some that we make as a group. There are some that the people who are administrators have to make informed by the views of the group, and there are some that the administrators have to make on their own. It's just the way that these things get structured. My goal is to always make sure that the people I work with know exactly what falls into what category. There's never anything happening behind the scenes. We all are on the same page about where and when decisions make place. I think it's really important that everybody knows, too, when and how they get to give input on the way the decisions are made in an organization. I think that when there's ambiguity about that, it can create a tension that isn't really necessary. The second one is that I believe strongly in creating and sustaining systems of support for people and for the initiatives that we work through. One of the things, as an example, that I think we often don't do as well as we might is mentoring programs for untenured faculty. One of the things that we do often is we pair up that untenured faculty with a tenured faculty member and say, okay, there's your mentor. We'll see you at the end of the year. Okay. Those kind of relationships, in my experience, are organic. They've got to be built over time. And I don't know that any one person can be a one-stop shop for all of the kinds of support that someone in that position needs. I think it's the same throughout the organization. So what I try to do is to build up a system around each person, whatever kind of position they're in, to make sure that two things. One, when someone leaves, all their good work doesn't go with them. And two, so that no one is relying completely on any one person for their guidance, their advice, or their mentoring. Another one, echoing what I was saying earlier about democratic leadership, is that I think it's very important that we keep in mind the mission, the vision, and the plans that we have moving forward as we're doing our work. We're all extremely busy working in these kinds of areas, and if we're not keeping our eye on where we want to be, whether it be a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, then I think it's easy to kind of miss the forest for the trees and not always be moving in the way that we want to move. The fourth one is that I believe that people in department chair positions and educational leadership positions in general need to advocate for and to champion the causes and the work of the people who are in their organizations. So along that lines, what that means is advocacy both within the college, within the university, within the unit, to make sure that, for example, people who need their time protected have that time protected. To make sure that people who need different types of resources than others, that we're working in that direction to try to provide those resources. And to make sure, especially in a place like this, that people know about what we're doing, that the people in the community know about the work we do, that the people in the schools know about the work we do, that the people up in Moscow know the work we do, the people all over have no ambiguity about the kinds of strengths that we can bring to solve and to work on educational problems in practice. The last one, and I think that this is critical, I'll talk about all of these a little bit more in just a minute, is promoting and nurturing a positive work environment. I think that my goal is always for the organizations that I work with that it's going to be a place that when you get up in the morning you're excited about going in, that you respect your colleagues, that you are looking forward to getting their perspectives on things, even if they're not perspectives you hold. That's one of the great things we have about being in a room with lots of smart people. We don't always agree. But that can be a strength rather than a weakness if we promote the right type of culture around the place. So what I'm going to talk about now is to get a little bit more detailed on what that looks like in specific areas of the kind of work that a Department of Leadership and Counseling does. Now, with regard to leadership and teaching, what we sometimes call instructional leadership in K-12, I think that it's really important that we practice transparency. What I mean by that is that we're often right down the hallway from people who can contribute a lot to the types of things that we're doing in our courses or advising our students, but we often don't do a great job of communicating that to one another. And so one of my aims is to open up the curriculum so that people understand what other folks are doing, where they're coming from, their orientations. That also allows us to capitalize on other types of connections we might have, say, to the community, to our alumni, to different departments, to different other kinds of stakeholders in the area. Again, with regard to teaching, I think it's important to build support systems. One of the things that I think is we usually in these kind of departments have amazing teachers, and we don't always make sure that those teachers are sharing some of their expertise with each other around the place. And I think that that's one of the things that I like to work toward, is creating those kind of systems. It's important that we connect people and that we not get siloed into different areas, and that we focus on quality, productivity, and relevance when we're teaching, when we're advising dissertations, and we're doing all of our kind of work with students or together around teaching. We're also, nationally speaking, always in an increased atmosphere where evaluation and assessment is at the forefront of discussions, both in K-12 and in higher education. And it's something that we've got to look at. One of these is that I think it's really important that we look, for example, at the outcomes and processes of the courses and not just course evaluations when we're trying to make decisions about quality of courses. Often, maybe an instructor who doesn't get the, straight perfect scores in their evaluations has been the one that's also pushing their students into challenging areas of thought where they really need to go. And so to me, it's got to be more holistic than just looking at teaching evaluations. I think also that a lot of the things that we're talking about here translate really well into coursework, but also into advising and creating the kinds of systems of support through our advising so that it's not only one advisor being the only contact person a student has for their whole program. When possible, then we need to be creating systems so that students know that their support transcends just their individual relationship with their advisor. Everybody hanging in there with me, okay? All right. I'm getting a few of these. So just want to make sure. All right. Now, when we talk about leadership in the area of research, I think the most critical thing that I've experienced with regard to this is establishing and creating vibrant support networks. Now, that means something very different than it did in teaching. Support networks with regard to research often mean, yes, being engaged at the local level, so there's access to the different kinds of environments and contexts where people might want to do their research. But it also means being networked at the state level, at the national level, and at the international level for most scholars, so that you're aware of all the different kinds of opportunities available to you in terms of publication opportunities, in terms of grant-funded research, and all of those kinds of things that we need to make sure that we're all aware of. I think it's really common to me, for example, when I'm meeting with faculty who say, oh, well, I can't, especially because I study something that many people are quick to say, oh, there's no funding out there for that, social justice research. There's a lot of funding out there for that if you know where to look. There's even parts of NSF, for example, that fund some of the types of things that other people don't think they do. So one of my goals as a leader of research is to make sure people are aware of the opportunities, that they're connected to the people who can help them see those opportunities and make them have an actual impact in their careers. One of the things that I noticed too is that we tend to emphasize exclusively products and not really talk about processes when we talk about our research. And I think that one of the things that's really easy to do in education or in service-related fields like we're all in is to get heavily involved with outreach activities, with service activities, with all of those kinds of things, and then you realize a semester has passed and you didn't get that article out. And another semester passes and there's 2 or 3 things that, oh, I'm working on it, but it hasn't gotten out. And that's where I think that mentoring needs to come into play, is to talk not only about products, not only say at the end of the year, what have you done, but to start looking at it on a week-to-week, a day-to-day basis. How do we spend our time? How do we put in processes in place that are going to lead to the kind of productivity and the kind of high-level work that we all want to be doing? I think also one of the things with regard to research that needs to be emphasized is that we're often very quick to talk about our areas of interest. But I would shift the conversation from interest to importance. And just think that in my experience, most everybody is studying things that are of critical importance in schools and communities and the different kinds of contexts where you do your work. But we don't often communicate it in that way. And so it becomes very important that we connect and that we understand up and down the halls and in the communities, in our national organizations and so on and so forth, the importance of the work we do, and make sure that we're communicating it in a way that actually gets the findings of the work we do to the audiences that can do something with it. Along those regards, one of the things that I've been involved with is doing lots of multimedia presentation of research, the short clips that we do highlighting different people's research, the types of policy briefs, shorter synopses of research that can get quickly your work into the hands of legislators, school leaders, counselors, whoever needs to be able to have it as quickly as possible. I think that's something that is important, but also shouldn't fall as a burden onto the people doing the research solely, because that's often, for example, not going to get you tenure to write a policy brief. But if we've got people helping write those, and another thing that is I've had some really good experience partnering up students, graduate students and professors to write some of these briefs so that they get out faster and are a good quality product. Okay. The other thing when we talk about leadership for service, a couple of the things to emphasize is that service should have synergy with all the other different parts of our professional lives. Whatever our research expertise is, whatever our teaching expertise, these are the specialized skills that we can offer specialized service for the different types of communities and people that we serve. So I tend to think about service as applying our skills and talents to both local and to global communities. That can look many different ways. It can be giving workshops, it can be partnering through different programs, it can be doing lots of different types of work. But the important thing is that we're making it a good connection that impacts all the different types of things that we do as in a department like this. It's also important, I think, too, to try to balance giving service at the different levels we need to, at the program, the department, our community, the university and college and all of that, so that people are able to engage in meaningful service activities that actually do something. Some of the advice I got early on in my career was, oh, get on that committee because they never meet and they don't do anything. Honestly, to me, that's an incredible waste of time. What I would rather do is I would rather be involved in a few service activities that really do something positive, that I can feel like my time is well spent. I don't really, my feeling about the communities that never meet and never do anything, eliminate them. And let's create the ones that really need to be there, where you can say, my time is well spent there, and I'm making a difference when I'm in that community. The other thing is that we talk a lot about research, teaching, and service, but I think that collegiality is the one that we always need to keep in mind, and that really is the sort of fiber that makes an educational unit a special place to work. Along those lines, some of the things that I think are really important to do are to make it so it's not an isolating culture, but one that's positive and collaborative. That doesn't mean forcing people into working in teams who don't want to work in teams. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about always knowing that your colleagues support what you do, that they respect what you do, even if they disagree with you, that's fine. But as long as we've got a positive and collaborative culture where you know that your ideas are respected and that they're going to contribute to the greater good of the community. What that means to me is creating a culture of respectful challenge, meaning that, for example, if I put out an idea at a department meeting, that doesn't mean it's the gospel. That means it's out there for people to say, well, you know what, we did that 8 years ago and that's not going to work. You know what, there's this person I know who works right down the hallway who knows a lot about that stuff, let's connect to them. That's how we end up becoming greater than the sum of our parts, is when we're doing things out in the open in a non-threatening way, and we're able to challenge each other in a way that we know you're not attacking my ego, you're attacking the idea. And that's the only way that the ideas are going to be vetted and good and move forward in a positive way anyway. The other thing, as Trudy mentioned before, is that I've been involved with a group that practices juggling flaming chainsaws. It's the name of a book that I helped co-edit, and it's just paying attention to the fact that, one of the wonderful things about working in a place like this is that we get to work with great students, we get to teach, we get to do all kinds of amazing work up here. And as one of my mentors said to me one time, the great thing about education is it challenges us mentally. The terrible thing about it is that it challenges mentally 24/7. And it's easy, these are easy jobs to let consume you, and these are easy jobs also to, if you're purposeful and attentive to it, to create a balance between work and life so that you are productive in all those phases and enjoying it. And it's a conversation that often only happens in parking lots and not in the building. And so I would just say that one of my approaches as a leader is to make sure that we're mindful of those different types of aspects of our life, because if we're not treating it holistically, then I don't think we're doing service to each other as colleagues. Of course, I think that we need to be celebrating accomplishments. Those look very different in a place like this. Sometimes they're amazing teaching accomplishments, sometimes it's research, sometimes it's service, sometimes it's outreach. There are so many different ways it can look, and to me, part of the goal of a department chair should be to make sure that we are noting everyone's accomplishments. Even where I work right now, I have to still go into people's offices and, how are things going? And I didn't want to tell anybody, but I got this article accepted at so-and-so. That's not what we want. We want a place where getting something accepted in a journal isn't just about, that's a team triumph. That's how I would look at it. Not that someone should sort of share the credit for their work with people who weren't involved in it. But to me, when someone is having an excellent or a accomplishment that's very positive, that's something that brings us all up. There shouldn't be a competition between us. There ought to be something where we are together pulling each other up and celebrating the different things that we do. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit into the other two questions I haven't dealt with much. And then I don't want to talk too much longer so we can open it up for discussion. But I was posed 3 questions to discuss, and I think I've discussed some of them so far, but we'll get a little bit more specific now. This question has to do with perceiving the current state of educational leadership as a profession, basically P20. One of the things that we're seeing is that leadership can no longer be treated as sort of a generic thing that works well in the same as in nursing, in the business world, in schools, in higher education, is that it's got to be connected for us educational leaders, P20, to learning. It's got to go beyond just making efficient systems and look at both the processes that we affect and also the outcomes that we indirectly impact. So one of the things that for me is a great emphasis that you're seeing internationally really, is a focus on connecting leadership to learning. Obviously, we're in a culture of increased demands for evidence and accountability. To me, that's something that is often pitched in a punitive sense, but I think that there's also a positive side to both evidence and accountability if we've got the right culture of challenge in place. If people are willing to say, okay, guess what? Those standardized tests that you're giving don't measure everything that I'm doing in this classroom. So, but not stopping the conversation there, but saying, okay, but now let's develop things that will. Let's move it further. And let's really get at what is really going on and make sure that accountability is something that we're responsible for both personally and then collectively. Another thing, you mentioned in the introduction the book that I edited called What Principals Can Do to Create Equitable and Excellent Schools. That grew out of a conversation that I had with a friend of mine, George Theo Harris, who's a professor at Syracuse. We both had the same experience being the outside members on dissertations about science education. That the chair of the committee and the student looked at us and said, so what does the leadership research say about science education? And we had to mainly go, not much. Because a lot of educational leadership research has traditionally treated instructional leadership as a generic thing that just happens the same, whether it's math, science, reading, whether it's elementary school, middle school, high school, higher education. And I think that one of the things that marks the kind of time we're in as a field is that that's not okay anymore, is that we're trying to connect. In that book, what we did is we got content experts in all of these areas, science, ELL, reading, mathematics, to tell us basically, if you could tell principals any 10 things about your area, what is the essential knowledge they need to know to be a real instructional leader in science or in math or in technology? And the book's not meant to be sort of like the final word on any of those areas, but it's meant to be something that a principal could use both to get basic knowledge and to open up a real learned conversation with the people they're serving and advising and observing. Another one is doing a more purposeful job of connecting leadership to policy, to communities and students. And that may mean, in terms of students and communities, practicing a form of culturally relevant pedagogy when we do our work, so that we know that, so that we're not doing leadership at people, but we're doing leadership with people. We're making sure that leadership is something that's co-constructed by leaders and followers, and not just something that's sort of done at people in a way that may or may not be meaningful and get them to the types of things that they want to move toward. The other thing is this connection to policy, which I think is undervalued, and is, to be honest, one of the real attractions to me of this position is its proximity to the different kinds of educational policymakers in the state of Idaho. I mean, the fact that the legislature, that the State Board of Education, that the teachers' unions, and lots of groups like this are right in the backyard gives us the opportunity to create an audience out of them if we engage them properly. And I know some of that work's going on now, so I'm not saying it doesn't exist. But to me, that connection to policy, being a place, a land-grant, research-rich university like the University of Idaho, should have a strong voice in the kinds of decisions that are happening at the state level in education. We are in a state of fiscal austerity, which means we ain't got no money. And school districts are dealing with this lots of different ways. It looks different in urban schools and rural schools. In Iowa, one of the things we're experiencing right, left, and center is school consolidation, where districts are consolidating just to get through the school year. They're pooling their resources. We have some of the urban schools are shutting down schools left and right to consolidate to make the most of resources. This is the kind of thing that I think needs this sort of fiscal austerity is something we can't ignore anymore in education. The solution for our issues is not always we need more money. We're going to have to figure out ways, both in higher education and in K-12, to do more with less and to be as creative as possible. We also have to, unfortunately, well, we have to be in a state where we're thinking about revenue generation as a very serious thing that we do to be able to sustain the types of creative and innovative things we want to do. We're also a rapidly changing country, and I think that both issues of mobility and changing demographics are no longer an issue that's confined to urban centers or the sort of coastal areas. The demographic change and mobility is now a nationwide thing, and not only on a national level either, but at a global level. And it's very common, for example, maybe many of you work with schools where I was working with a principal last week who has 32 different languages spoken in the school. You know, this is an increasingly common thing, you know, and it's something that all of our fields are impacted by. I would like to see us be a leader and be out in front of those kinds of issues to make sure that we're not just responding to these kinds of dynamics, but that we're leading in them. Second question I was given was talking about drivers for change. Some of these that I think are increasingly valued are research-based practice, which puts the University of Idaho at a particularly position of strength, being in policy conversations. I think that increasingly it's not going to be enough just to say, well, the district next door is doing it, so it seemed like a good idea. We're going to have to always be making sure that our practice is research-based and that the teachers and the administrators and the counselors and the people we're putting out into the field are themselves not only consumers of research, but able to have the sophisticated tools of research at their disposal to do their own jobs. I think that for a school like this, I think rethinking the land-grant mission as something that's service-oriented, that how can research be made to be a service to the people of Idaho is a critical thing that we always need to be rethinking when we do all phases of our work, whether it be how we communicate our research, the types of projects we take on, the types of collaborations that we enter into, or anything like that. Grant-funded projects are obviously something that's taking increasing importance, but to me, too, the thing that I don't like is when we just hear, grants are important, go get some money. And that's pretty much what we hear. My approach has been, when I work with faculty and groups, toward grants is to take it progressively and to help mentor people at the early stages of their career winning small grants and then build them up toward getting bigger and bigger types of awards so that it's not, and I think early career grant seeking is a different phase than later career grant seeking. And so that's one of the things that I believe. Also, internationalization and globalization is going to take an increasingly important role in all of our work. I think that we have, most recently we hear the sort of siren calls from countries like Finland to learn about some of the things that are going on over there. But the work that I've been engaged in has shown me we've got lessons to learn from every country around the world. Some of the most incredible teachers I've ever seen are teaching with nothing more than a few rocks and some twigs. I think that one of the things that we've got to do is be aware of how global and international forces are influencing our communities and our education and the ways that we're influencing them in return. And we already talked about engaging in the policy process. The last, and we're right at the end here, so if you can hang in for a few more minutes, we'll be done. But the last one was posing the question of what is my philosophy of leadership and how would I oversee and provide leadership for programs that are delivered on several campuses and several programs. Of course, my background is in educational leadership, so who am I to lead rehabilitation counseling or something like that? One of the things that for me that's important to do is to break down the programs into some common things that are features of all. So for example, if we looked at the programs in terms of recruitment, induction, coursework, whatever the capstone experience may be, thesis, portfolio, dissertation, whatever that is, graduation and then post-graduation, really focusing on how we connect to and retain and create a vibrant network with our alumni. If we can break it down into each of those things, then we have a manageable way to think about program improvement, both as a department and for each program individually. And so for me, creating support systems in each of these and figuring out the synergy where we can share efforts, but where certain things are going to be unique to each program. There's no way around that. And so just knowing, for example, which things are common and which things are unique are going to help us improve the programs at a departmental level. Now, this is the last slide I wanted to share with you, everything I've said up till now is sort of moving from pretty abstract and big idea toward getting a little more concrete. And so I tried to push myself to say, okay, well, what, if I were to be chosen for a position like this, what would I actually do? What would this look like? And so I started thinking about step one would be contacting all of you folks and everyone. I know, for example, that some of the programs are going through NCAID and different kinds of accreditation things. I get my hands on everything I could possibly get my hands on to just read about the programs, learn about them, be reading people's CVs, be looking at their websites, all of that kind of stuff to just familiarize myself with everything that's going on so that I'm not asking you those questions when I showed up in the fall. Step two would be to do individual follow-ups to clarify and to learn more so I really understand what I'm reading and it's not just washing over me in a flood of information. Step three then would be, once I've kind of gotten some clarity and I'm starting to understand some issues, would be to send some online surveys. I use Qualtrics a lot, and that's one of the things that I've found is very helpful in getting your finger on the pulse of some place that has many different sites or students that are spread out all over the state. I run a program coordinator of a fully online master's program right now. One of the best ways we get feedback is not waiting until the end of the semester for teaching evaluations, but when we start having issues, say, okay, well, let's put together a survey around this issue, find out what's going on. And then also not just using that information for my own edification, but that's the first thing we discuss at the faculty meeting. Okay, hey, we sent out this survey about X. That's the first meeting agenda item. So the data is always ubiquitous and visible. Step four would be individual meetings, and this would be actually arriving here. It will be individual meetings with everybody and meetings with all programs to start thinking about the different kinds of support that's needed, what's really working well, what isn't working well, what can we improve, what do we have to say work toward that might take a couple of years. Step 5 would be meeting more specifically with programs to set goals, to find out what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what do we need moving forward, and all of those kinds of things. Step 6, and this would be later on down the road, would be then starting to work on, and I know you have some of this already at the university and college and departmental level to some extent, but a mission, vision, strategic plan, and a communications plan, so that we're making sure that we're connecting to all the different kinds of stakeholders that we need to be communicating with, and that everybody's involved in our process moving forward. And then, as we move that, then moving into hopefully a mode where we're in a continuous improvement mode, not just sort of scrambling from report to report or doing things, okay, we're going to do this year 1. We want to be able to go say, here's what we're doing year 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4 moving forward. Thank you very much, everyone. We have some time, so let's open it up for discussion.
Yeah, it's, being the reddest state in the union, people don't realize we have over 134 languages in the Boise School District alone because Twin Falls has similar because of refugee centers we have. So that is a huge issue, which we've not really got too involved in.
And I guess it's not just Boise either.
No.
One of the things I work with a principal who's in a suburban kind of district in Iowa, who just, for example, about 2 months ago, they took in 32 refugees from Burma. So their language issues, their culture issues, and he says, well, who do I have? So we're working to help get some support set up and all of those kinds of things. It's a complicated issue, absolutely.
You talked about the 3 different kinds of decisions in a department. Could you give us an example of the time that you instituted that and how it worked?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's one of the things that we're doing right now at the meetings that I'm running, is we'll end every meeting by talking about those kinds of things. I think one of the things that can let's see, okay, here's a good example. We, at Iowa State, they have not traditionally, we do many things very well. One of the things we don't do very well is support our graduate students traveling to conferences. We, when I got there, for example, I asked how much we spent on that, and each student has available to them $200, which if you try to travel to a conference, really won't get you very far out of the city limits these days. One of the things we started, but of course, we're also in a situation of, okay, yes, we'd all like to get more money, but where does that money come from? So we started deciding, for example, that decision up to this point had been solely a decision of the department chair. We would just look at the budget in isolation and say, here's how much we can carve it up and allot to this. And so what we did is through the budget open, said we decided as a faculty one of our values that we want to have is related to supporting these students. So while initially we couldn't raise it up to a really high level, we were able to set up a system whereby people could have $250 as a baseline, but then they could double that if they were presenting a paper. And that decision was made by first sending out a survey to everyone, finding out if this was really an issue that everyone shared, finding out what our values were around it, and then coming back together to look at the budget together and to decide what was feasible given where we were right now. So that's a situation of recognizing that one decision that had been in a certain category needed to be moved to another. And so we did it as a team. And then, there are some issues related to personnel or different kinds of issues that are more confidential and obviously have to be treated in a different and more sensitive manner. But to me, what's important is that everyone knows what decisions fall into what categories, just so you don't find out later, oh, well, how come that person got $500 more to go do this? I didn't even know I could request that. That's the kind of thing we wouldn't want to have happen.
Dr. Brooks, our colleagues in Idaho Falls, Moscow, and Coeur d'Alene may have some questions as well. Let's give them an opportunity. Are there any questions from other sites?
I have a question. This is Brian in Idaho Falls. I'm just curious, you mentioned research-based practice. Always be sure practice is research-based. Would you mind explaining just a little bit more of what you meant specifically? Or give an example of research-based practice?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I found in educational leadership and working with school leaders in particular is finding out that many of the decisions that are being made are not driven by any kind of data or by any kind of research. And so that what's happening is in one of the books that I wrote, I called this a difference between data-making decision-making and dada decision-making. So it's the difference between making decisions with data and with nothing. And one of the things that I think that we're seeing is that we simply don't have all of the data we need to be making every single decision that's important in schools. But what we do have is if we often have a research base that can inform lots of the different practices that we do. So, for example, that's one of the things that in the classes that I was talking about that we do is we identify an issue in the school where decisions need to be made. And then we say, okay, well, school leaders don't often have time to like go out and to do this extensive literature review and to decide, to judge the merit of the different types of information that they might take into account. So what we do is in the classes, we use that as this sort of unique opportunity to dig deeper into those things. And then we create, these policy briefs or almost like literature digests to help people make decisions. I think that, so when I'm saying research-based, I'm not only talking about, I'm talking about a bigger and more expansive vision of what research is probably than is commonly used in educational leadership. And I definitely, when I say research-based, I also mean people doing site-based research as well, to make sure that they know not just, for example, I studied school reform, and one of the things we know is that one of the greatest mistakes that people can do is just adopt another reform without thinking about context. And so that's part of it too, is urging people to not only know what the literature says about the types of things that they're trying to do in their schools or communities, and also what their context-specific types of things that might influence that could be. So, does that get close to an answer?
That was actually excellent. That just affirms a few things for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure.
Are there other questions, perhaps from Coeur d'Alene or from Moscow?
Yes, this is Jim Gregson in Moscow. Dr. Brooks, first of all, thanks for this presentation. I look forward to meeting you tomorrow in Moscow.
Sounds good.
I think your research agenda really resonates with some of my colleagues in this department. Let me ask you, have you had experience in perhaps embracing values at the micro level that are pretty pervasive with colleagues with regards to race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, perhaps sexual orientation, but maybe the macro, important stakeholder groups may have a different value system than what's embraced at the micro level. Can you speak to how you have grappled with those differences in the context?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that as an ethnographer that I tend to look at, and I think that it's a mistake we sometimes make in the, so I'm trying to think which one it is.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes up in that issue is one of the great cautions that Clifford Geertz, who is the person that's often quoted for saying thick and rich description is the standard for qualitative research, also said that one of the biggest mistakes we do is that we do sociology without society. And what that means is that we tend to look so closely at the micro that we don't connect it to what's actually happening in the communities or the world at large. So for example, we can have these amazing conversations about discrimination, about race. We can in our classes sometimes teach, there are great teaching tools out there to help people have individual breakthroughs and to be able to see things in a different way. But when they're outside of that sort of controlled environment, if they're not able to have the skills to scale those things up and to move them beyond just their own learning, then it's only of a limited impact. And so one of the things that I think that when you are trying to teach about discrimination or race or any of these kinds of things, you have to understand that they happen, as you're saying, at many different levels. So there's the individual beliefs that need to be interrogated and deconstructed. Then there's also the looking at it in terms of sort of what does it mean to my identity as an educator? What do these things mean in the communities I'm teaching? And then when we're looking at the kinds of groups that we work with in schools or at any educational community, then we understand that those things connect to larger societal forces. So I think that what we need to do, and I'm actually working on a book about this right now, but what we need to do is we need to be engaging multiple levels simultaneously. And that's the one thing that I think we miss when we take on these dynamics is we're very good at teaching people to be reflective. We're very good at teaching people to maybe have an impact in their classroom or possibly even in their school. We do a very poor job of figuring out how to help people connect that to larger communities and to different types of non-controlled environments that are beyond the sort of normal educational boundaries.
Thank you.
I hope I stumbled in the direction of a good response.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's give Coeur d'Alene an opportunity. Any questions in Coeur d'Alene?
Yes. This is Wanda Quinn, Coeur d'Alene. I wondered if you could speak to involvement you've had supporting leadership at the school and district level in terms of school improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's obviously one of the most important things we can possibly be doing. One of the things, most of the levers that I have used in working with school districts have been through two things. Working very closely with the in-district professional development programs for administrators. So I've gotten very involved with, for example, some of the workshop types activities like what I was telling you about earlier with science education, math education. One of the things that I found that we have often is experts in all of these areas at the university, and I've used those kind of connections to get those people into the schools talking to some of our administrators and designing some professional development opportunities for them. I've also been a critical friend for many administrators working in their districts so that I'm the person that can say, well, why are you doing that? Why is that okay? Or did you consider this? And setting up critical friends networks has been really powerful with administrators. I've also been involved working with several teacher leadership programs, and that's been a wonderful experience because it's allowed us to break down that culture of us versus them that some schools can develop around administrators and teachers. The one where people say, oh, so-and-so was such a great colleague when they were a teacher. What the heck happened to him? And to help people understand the different types of pressures and demands and opportunities that happen when you make those kinds of shifts. So I've also worked with another big area that I've worked with teachers and administrators in school districts around has been helping them hone and develop their research skills to help them be able to look at their classrooms and their schools through a researcher's eyes. And particularly, one of the things that, given my expertise, has been helping them see schools the way an anthropologist might. So helping them pay more attention to culture. For example, one of the biggest mistakes I think we make in educational leadership is we have this idea that there is a school culture. I think my experience and what any anthropologist would probably tell you is that there are many cultures, there are subcultures, everybody interprets what's happening differently. And so I think that one of the things that the work I've done with districts has helped them with is to get more in tune with the different types of cultures, subcultures, different interpretations that people will have, and not just assume, for example, that if I do X, people will interpret it Y. and to make it a richer, more nuanced understanding of culture than that.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Dr. Brooks, we're running up against our time, but maybe we can take one or two more brief questions.
Well, this is actually from John.
Could you walk a little closer so the other people can see you? We're having transmission problems.
Just imagine me really handsome and very fashion forward.
This is, John asked me to ask this question.
Okay.
He had to go to a meeting, I think, at the State Department. What role do you see for career and technical education playing in preparing students for the competitive global economy?
Yeah, I mean that's got to be a key centerpiece of what we're doing. And I think that one of the things we saw was, especially over the late 80s, some of the career and vocational programs kind of losing ground and really fading away. And I think that the last decade has finally seen them gaining an area of prominence again. And I think that for me, some of the more innovative high schools are doing such amazing things around this area. One of the high school where I did my dissertation, I'm still very much in touch with. They have wonderful culinary arts programs, forensic science programs, all kinds of, in addition to some of the more typical types of traditional areas of career and vocational. So to me, I think you seeing that area storming back, but with a lot more connection to things that have not been traditionally taught in those kinds of areas.
Thank
you. Anyone else?
I'm the engineer in the audience, so forgive my question, but why are you interested in coming to University of Idaho?
That's a great question. You say as the snow starts falling. I have many personal and professional reasons. For one thing, I live in Ames, Iowa, which is a lovely place but very small, and I cannot do the kind of research that I really want to do in that setting. That's one challenge. I think that I've also my goal has been to be a department chair. I am not. I have many colleagues, in fact, my two best friends both want to be deans. I have no interest in that, but I've always thought for me that the department chair position is the perfect marriage of being close enough to faculty that you're in a great position to know what's going on and support them, but you're also then connected to the larger university in a way that you can leverage support from those kind of areas. As far as Boise itself, for me, it's a perfect size town. I also I have little kids that I think that the area offers lots of things to them, and so to me, it's really bringing together lots of things, and I've gotten to hear sort of the good stories about the good work happening up here through Dr. Gardner for a couple of years now. So it's not all new to me.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Idaho Falls, your site is the one that Dr. Brooks will not be visiting, so we'll give you one last shot. Any other questions from Idaho Falls?
No, we don't have anything. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We do have a little bit of flexible time for about the next 20 minutes. If you would like to informally continue on the conversation, for those who are here in Boise, and for our remote sites, I believe that you will stay online for about 15 minutes and then magic may occur and you will be cut off. However, Dr. Brooks will be in your neighborhood tomorrow. So anyway, if there are other questions formally as a group, or, Jeff, if you have any last comments you'd like to share.
Well, I would just say thanks everybody for taking the time out of your day to come listen today. And I know this is actually not the way I normally present. It's a lot of talking at you, but usually I was taught as a cooperative learning guy, so I'm like, the way these tables are set up just warms my heart, right? And that they have wheels is magical. But I would just say that I'm very excited about the possibilities. I'm really starting to, just learn a little bit about the town. The facility is amazing, I think. I hope that you heard a few things that meant something to you. And I guess if I could clarify any questions nobody feels like asking here today, then please just shoot me an email or have my phone number. So thanks very much again for your time.
Thank you. So everyone, feel free to be informal for the next 15 minutes or so. And Eric and I and Mary are going Oh yes, and you have feedback forms. Will everyone please complete a form? And it has information as to return it. Thank you so much.
Sounds like you spent quite a bit of time in the February.
Yeah, let me know about
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm
from Northern
bothered.